In every crowd, there's someone who quietly observes instead of participates. Someone whose mind travels deeper than the moment, who doesn't quite fit into the noise of the world, yet feels deeply connected to something greater. If you've ever felt like you're walking a different path, not because you chose to be different, but because the path chose you, then what you have is not strangeness. It is rarity. Today we explore 8 signs that reveal whether you possess a personality that is rare not by accident, but by design. And while most may never fully understand such a mind, the world desperately needs it. Let's delve into the first of 5 profound signs that shape such a soul. Most people drift toward comfort like moths to a flame, charmed by the warmth of certainty, drawn to the glow of approval, and lulled by the rhythm of routine. They follow well-worn paths not because these roads fulfill them, but because they are lit and busy, and everyone else is walking them. The comfort of being accepted, of knowing what comes next, of never having to question anything too deeply. This is the safety net that catches most souls. But there are others, very few, who cannot rest in comfort when truth still eludes them. They live with a quiet, relentless urgency to understand, not just to believe. To penetrate the surface, not just skate across it. To sit in the fire of uncertainty, not just bathe in the waters of familiarity. If you are among these, then you already know the loneliness that often comes with it. You have felt the silence in rooms where your questions were met with nervous smiles, the unease in conversations where your depth was mistaken for disruption. The world rarely celebrates those who disturb its illusions, but you disturb them anyway. Not to rebel, not to agitate, but because you must. Your spirit is attuned not to consensus, but to coherence. You do not ask, what do people want to hear, but what rings true in the deepest chambers of my being. This kind of truth-seeking is not just intellectual, it is existential. It demands the dismantling of inherited beliefs, the courageous reevaluation of what you were taught to never doubt. It asks you to hold the paradoxes of life in your hands without flinching. You have looked at religious traditions, scientific claims, social norms, and even your own inner narratives and said, this may feel familiar, but does it reflect reality? That question alone sets you apart because most don't dare ask it. Not really. Not when the answers might cost them their peace, their place in the tribe, or the identity they've spent years constructing. There is a deep solitude in this path, but there is also a quiet power. Because when truth becomes your compass, not comfort, you become unshakable. You are not swayed by trends, not paralyzed by disapproval, not blinded by the bright lights of mass validation. You begin to see what others overlook, to question what others take for granted, to understand that comfort often disguises stagnation, and that pain, when it comes from growth, is not suffering, but transformation. History remembers those who sought truth above comfort, not because they were applauded in their time, but because their legacy transcended it. Galileo, yes, but also the countless unnamed mystics, scientists, philosophers, and artists who paid the price for insight with loneliness, exile, or ridicule. They could have stayed quiet, many did, but the rare ones couldn't. Something inside would not let them, and something also lives in you. You may be sitting alone in your room, questioning the beliefs of your family, the values of your community, or the choices that everyone says are normal. You may wonder if your desire for more, for deeper understanding, for real meaning is a curse. It is not. It is a calling. One that doesn't come with certainty, but with clarity. One that doesn't bring applause, but integrity. One that may never make life easy, but will always make it real. Comfort may offer rest, but only truth offers freedom. Not the loud, performative freedom that boasts of rebellion for its own sake, but the silent, steady liberation of a soul that knows itself. And once you've tasted that kind of freedom, you cannot go back to pretending. You may still play your roles, still wear the masks when needed, still nod at small talk, but inside you remain awake, alive, and aware. And that awareness, though it may isolate you from the many, will connect you to the few who live as you do, who burn for truth more than praise, who search not for places to hide, but for light to reveal. These souls, rare as they are, find each other in time, not always in crowds, but in quiet glances, in shared silences, in writings passed across generations, in the feeling that somewhere someone else also refuses to be fooled. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are simply tuned to a different frequency. The one that dares to ask what is real, no matter the cost. That frequency is not for the faint of heart, but it is the only one that can lead to a life not of illusion, but of depth, meaning, and truth. You walk into a room and feel what others don't say. Before a word is spoken, you already sense the tone beneath the conversation. A nervous glance, a forced laugh, a sudden shift in posture. You catch it all, not through logic, but through something older, deeper, wordless. You're attuned not to what is loud, but to what is quiet. You hear the spaces between words. You see the weight behind smiles. You feel the room before it reveals itself. And while this ability can feel like a blessing, it often feels more like a burden, because so few people know what to do with someone who sees them before they're ready to be seen. You don't speak about it often. You don't announce what you feel, not because you're hiding, but because you've learned. You've learned that many prefer denial to discovery. That vulnerability makes people nervous. That when you speak the truth of what's unspoken, the air gets thick, the conversation tightens, and people shift uncomfortably. So you've adapted. You hold your awareness like a flame in your hands, close, careful, protective. You journal instead of confront. You write poems instead of accusations. You cry alone instead of explaining why you're overwhelmed. You've become fluent in the silent languages of music, imagery, intuition, because the spoken word often feels too blunt, too inadequate for what you're carrying. There is a story of a child who, when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, answered, "I want to be someone who understands why people are sad." She didn't want to fix them. She didn't want to become a doctor or a celebrity. She wanted to understand. That's what you do. You don't just notice behavior. You feel the story behind it. When someone lashes out, you feel the pain beneath the anger. When someone withdraws, you see the fear inside the silence. And even when someone appears to have it all together, you pick up on the subtle cues that hint otherwise. A slightly too wide-bred smile, a hollow laugh, a look that lingers too long. You feel it. You always have. And yet your emotional fluency has often been misunderstood. Some have called you sensitive as if that were a weakness. Others have said you overanalyze as if death were something to be ashamed of. But what they don't see is how much strength it takes to carry so much feeling, to navigate a world that numbs while you awaken, to feel the sorrow of a stranger and still keep moving, to be flooded with empathy and still remain fun. You are not fragile. You are forged, refined by fire and feeling. You've learned to swim in emotional waters that most don't even know exist. There's a moment usually in conversation with someone who's hurting when you say something simple, something you thought was obvious, and the other person goes quiet. They blink. Their voice trembles and they say, "I've never told anyone that before." That's your gift. You don't need hours of explanation. You don't need someone to draw you a map. You arrive at the heart of things instinctively, not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because you truly see them. Most people just want to be heard. You offer more. You understand, and yes, this gift has cost you. You've cried at things others laughed at. You've stayed up all night replaying a conversation, wondering if you hurt someone without knowing it. You've been overwhelmed in crowds drained by surface talk, lost in your own emotional landscapes. But still, you carry on. You feel and you function. You empathize and you endure. You listen not just to respond, but to witness. And in a world that often talks too loudly and listens too little, your presence is healing. Even when you say nothing at all, you've likely found sanctuary in places others overlook. Old books, forgotten songs, quiet parks, moments of stillness. You're drawn to the symbolic, the soulful, the sacred. You understand that there's more to life than what meets the eye, and that people like stories have layers that only the patient can uncover. You are patient. You wait. You feel. And when the time comes, you speak. Not to dominate, but to connect. The world needs more of this. Not more talking, not more opinions, more presence, more empathy, more quiet strength. And though your path may be lonely at times, it is not without purpose. The storm you feel in someone's silence, that's your compass. Follow it. It will lead you not away from yourself, but deeper into the rare soul that you are. There is a particular kind of restlessness that lives within certain souls. A quiet, aching hunger that cannot be satisfied by the trivial or the temporary. It is not a desire for more things, more status, or more approval. It is the yearning for depth, for truth, for something that cuts through the surface of ordinary life and reaches into the marrow of what it means to be human. While the world chats effortlessly about the weekend forecast or the latest celebrity scandal, you find yourself retreating inward, wondering how people can float so easily in waters so shallow. You don't judge them, at least not harshly, but you do feel the ache of disconnect. The sense that while others are content to swim on the surface, you were made to dive. You have always asked the kind of questions that stop conversations. What does it mean to be alive? Why do we fear uncertainty? What happens to the soul after death? These questions do not come from arrogance. They are not an attempt to sound deep or clever. They are simply the terrain your mind naturally wanders into when the noise of the world quiets for a moment. You don't look for these questions. They look for you. They come in the stillness, in the solitude, in the unguarded spaces where your awareness stretches out and brushes against the edges of something infinite. And you follow not because you hope to find final answers, but because the questions themselves carry meaning. They point to something real beneath the illusion. This craving for depth can feel like both a gift and a curse. In everyday life, it isolates you. You go to social events and smile politely, but you feel like a visitor from another dimension, someone fluent in a language no one else seems to speak. The chatter feels scripted, the laughter forced. You listen to conversations that circle endlessly around the same empty themes. And inside you are screaming for something real, something raw, something sacred. But it rarely comes. And so you begin to protect your energy. You pull back not out of snobbery, but out of self-preservation. Shallow waters drown deep souls in boredom. But then, sometimes rarely, you meet someone whose gaze lingers a moment too long. Someone who pauses before they answer. Someone who, like you, seems haunted by the weight of questions they can't articulate. And in those moments, the world shifts. The conversation bends. You speak of things others are too afraid to name. Loss, wonder, dreams, death, the ache of being human. Hours pass like minutes. Time disappears. And when the exchange ends, you feel as if you've touched eternity. This is the kind of connection you live for. Not quantity, but quality. Not noise, but resonance. You don't care how many people are around you. You care whether even one of them truly sees you. This isn't a weakness. This isn't a flaw in your personality that needs to be fixed. It is, in fact, your greatest strength. Because in a world obsessed with popularity, with appearances, with speed and noise and distraction, your longing for depth is an act of rebellion. It is a refusal to accept the superficial as enough. It is a call from the soul to live a life of purpose, not performance. While others are busy curating their image, you are carving your character. While they gather followers, you seek truth. While they skim, you sink into the unknown, unafraid of what you might find. You might not always be understood. The world often misreads the deep as distant, the quiet as cold, the solitary as strange. But you must not let that dissuade you. You are not here to entertain or to conform. You are here to awaken, and that awakening will cost you comfort, but it will give you something far more enduring. Meaning every soul is wired differently, and yours is wired for depth, for rich conversations, for silent reflections, for honest emotions, for mystery, for pain that transforms, for love that does not wear a mask. You may feel out of place in a world that prizes what you cannot pretend to care about. But you are not alone. There are others hidden quiet searching who carry the same hunger, who have learned to hide it just to survive. But they are out there. And when you live in your truth, when you stop apologizing for wanting more, you become a beacon, a light in a sea of artificial brightness. And those who crave what you crave will find you. Not all at once, not always clearly, but eventually. And when they do, you will recognize each other. Not by what you say, but by the depth of what you don't have to explain. There are individuals who dwell at the intersection of reason and instinct, those whose minds can build systems, analyze patterns, and speak the precise language of logic, yet whose hearts still listen to the quiet tremors beneath the surface of reality. These people are not split between two worlds. They are the rare synthesis of both. They possess the clarity of rational thought and the depth of intuitive knowing. And it is precisely this inner fusion that often causes others to misread them. Society tends to prefer people in neat categories: left-brained or right-brained, data-driven, or feeling-sensitive scientist or mystic. When someone comes along who effortlessly blends both, it causes discomfort because you can't be easily defined. You're often misunderstood. Some may call you contradictory. Others may label you inconsistent or indecisive. But that's only because they're watching a dance. They do not know how to follow. You are not unpredictable. You are multidimensional. You can walk into a meeting and quickly assess the financials, identify structural inefficiencies, and propose a strategic solution grounded in facts. And yet in the same breath, you can pause, sense the tension in the room, and feel that the numbers don't tell the full story. Perhaps something in a colleague's voice or a subtle shift in energy tells you there's resistance beneath the surface. You're the one who notices what's missing, not because it's written down, but because your perception includes what others overlook. This capacity to move between what is measurable and what is meaningful is your gift. But it also places you outside the comfort zone of those who need the world to fit inside neat little boxes. When asked how they make their best decisions, many people point to data trends, logic. But those who've shaped the world, from inventors to leaders, artists to innovators, speak of dreams, sudden clarity, and knowing that defies explanation. They describe moments that arise not from analysis, but from alignment, when the answer seems to reveal itself from within rather than from calculation. That's not chaos. That's inner wisdom. And you know this terrain well. You often feel pulled in two directions. The rational part of you wants to double-check, to wait, to measure. The intuitive part urges you to act, to trust, to leap. And while others might surrender to one side or the other, you do something far rarer. You hold both. You gather the data and also listen to the silence between the lines. You consider the facts and feel the pulse of a deeper truth rising beneath them. This does not make you less reliable. It makes you more whole. But wholeness is something few have the capacity to recognize, let alone understand. There may be times you doubt yourself. You may wonder if you're making things too complicated or reading too much into things. You may feel torn between what makes sense on paper and what resonates in your gut. But this tension is not a flaw. It is the creative friction where insight is born. Your ability to live in that space between evidence and emotion, between structure and soul, is a sign not of confusion, but of depth. Those around you might prefer clarity, clean answers, linear thinking. And so when you offer a decision shaped by both intellect and intuition, they may hesitate, but give it time. You will often be proven right. Not because you're smarter, but because you're listening to more than what others allow themselves to hear. You have learned that the most important variables are often invisible. Trust is not in a spreadsheet. A broken team doesn't show up in a graph. A brilliant idea often begins as a whisper, not a report. And you're one of the rare few who can tune into that frequency and translate it into action. This blend of logic and intuition is not a contradiction. It is balance. It is a harmony forged in complexity. You are not either/or. You are both/and. And while others may try to push you toward one side or the other, don't surrender your wholeness for the comfort of their categories. The world does not need more specialists locked in single modes of thinking. It needs integrators. People who can hold the paradox, read the data, feel the energy, and still move forward with clarity and conviction. And to live like this is not always easy. It is often lonely. But it is powerful because while others are confined to the narrow corridors of logic or intuition, you walk freely between them, gathering wisdom from both, shaping choices that are not just smart, but true. And that truth drawn from both the head and the heart is what creates lives of extraordinary impact. There is a quiet liberation in no longer needing to be understood. It does not come easily, and it is almost never chosen. It arrives after years of trying to translate yourself to others in languages they cannot hear. After countless conversations where you watered yourself down, softened your truth, or shrank your vision just to fit into the narrow frames others offered. But one day, the exhaustion of that effort outweighs its reward, and you stop. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because you realize the cost of being understood by others can sometimes be the betrayal of understanding yourself. From the time we are young, we are taught to seek approval, to conform, to explain, to smooth our edges, so we might be more easily held. But some people are born with minds shaped by solitude and spirits tuned to subtler frequencies. They see differently, feel more deeply, speak from a place others have never visited. These are the rare ones. And to be rare is by definition to be misunderstood. When you live in this way, aligned with your inner compass, you will find that people often misread your quiet as arrogance, your reflection as distance, your stillness as indifference. But what they are actually encountering is someone who no longer performs. Someone who does not bend to be liked, who does not rush to be explained, who does not decorate their soul for easier digestion. This is not coldness. This is sovereignty. You no longer feel the need to argue your worth in conversations that were never meant to understand you. You no longer translate your heart into the dialect of the disinterested. There is peace in that, a deep and tender peace that cannot be stolen, only grown into. You have discovered that alignment is more nourishing than approval, that truth sits heavier in the bones than praise ever could. And when you finally rest in that knowing, the world around you begins to change. Not because it suddenly understands you, but because your survival no longer depends on it. This path is not romantic. It is not always poetic. It can be lonely. It can feel at times like standing in a room full of noise trying to speak a language that no one else remembers. But if you listen closely, you'll hear echoes, quiet voices from the past of others who have walked it too. Van Gogh, who painted with light in his eyes and despair in his heart, knowing the world would not see the beauty until he was gone. Emily Dickinson, who wrote entire galaxies into fragile verses from her upstairs room, never seeking the spotlight, but touching eternity in silence. Nikola Tesla, who envisioned the future while the world laughed, pouring his mind into the unknown because he could not do otherwise. They were not chasing recognition. They were obeying something far more sacred, their own vision. And so are you. To be misunderstood and still continue to create, to speak, to love, to grow, is an act of profound courage. It means you trust what you know, even when it cannot be proven. It means you follow an inner voice that whispers through the fog of doubt and tells you to keep going. It means you have stopped living for applause and started living for alignment. This is not the absence of connection. In fact, when you make peace with being misunderstood, you begin to draw toward you the few who do understand, not because you tried to convince them, but because your authenticity calls to theirs. These are not many. They never are, but they are enough. You will know them by the way they do not flinch when you speak your truth, by the way they sit in your silence without trying to fill it, by the way their presence feels like home without explanation. To carry the burden of being rare without bitterness is a mark of maturity. To choose solitude over shallow companionship, authenticity over acceptance, vision over validation. This is strength. And this strength once it has rooted itself in your being, cannot be taken from you. You are not waiting to be understood. You are walking in your truth, and that is the most powerful language there is. If you recognized yourself in these signs, then know this. Your personality is not just rare, it's necessary. In a world obsessed with fitting in, you remind others what it means to stand firm, feel deeply, think freely, and live authentically. So don't shrink, don't dim. The world needs the light only you carry. And if no one ever tells you this, know that your way of being is not a defect. It's a design.